Former Vice President Mike Pence, if you saw this news, he's saying he will not endorse his former running mate. That would be former President Donald Trump. Not in 2024. Doesn't want him to be president.
On Face the Nation, he said he disagreed with the presumptive Republican nominee's approach on a range of issues, including his rhetoric about January 6th.
But I want to be clear that, I've forgiven the president in my heart for what happened that day. But the issue of fealty to the Constitution is not a small matter, but it's not just that. I mean, the reason that I cannot in good conscience endorse Donald Trump this year also has to do with the fact that he is walking away, not just from keeping faith with the Constitution on that day, but also, Margaret, with a commitment to fiscal responsibility, a commitment to the sanctity of life, a commitment to American leadership in the world.
Let's bring in CBS News political director Fin Gomez for more on this. Fin, thank you very much for being here. It feels so small and silly to talk about Biden policies and criticisms and places that he's fallen short as president when you have on the other side the vice president saying he doesn't want his former partner, the president, in office because he's walking away from the Constitution. I mean, they're just not on the same scale of critique. How much of an impact do you think this kind of non-endorsement might have on the race?
Yeah, Tony and Lilia, it's really quite remarkable. I mean, he was the running mate 4 years ago of Donald Trump, and now he's told Margaret Brennan yesterday that he's not going to be supporting Donald Trump. It's remarkable. It's historic. You can't think of really another time where this sort of change has occurred since really 1912 in that race when Teddy Roosevelt ran against his former vice president, right? So it's really unique. He obviously ran against him in the primary, did not do very well. Where does that sort of Pence voter go? It's sort of that mainstream traditional conservative who are sort of going to hold their nose and vote for Donald Trump, and that's the big question. Do they go to Biden or do they sit out, or how does that function? How does that impact the race? And if you look at it, his argument was it's that he's walking away from conservative principles, looking at some really key areas like his pro-life stance, and so it would be really interesting to see how that voter really goes and where they decide who they decide to vote for in 7 months from now.
Fin, I'm curious about just Trump's influence. Tony obviously was addressing this in terms of what others think of Trump, but I know he's been campaigning for Ohio Senate candidate Bernie Moreno over the weekend. Let's talk about how much sway the former president has on that particular race and just in general when he supports a candidate.
And if you look at that key Senate primary race, then whoever the winner is of that three-person Republican primary race will take on Sherrod Brown, the sitting Democratic senator there. But, yes, Donald Trump was in Ohio over the weekend supporting his candidate, Bernie Moreno, sort of a controversial candidate, but really has that MAGA base there in Ohio. And then you look at the other leading candidate in that primary race, Matt Dolan, the state senator there, who's got the support of the Republican governor, Mike DeWine, and former Ohio Senator Rob Portman. And they're spending a ton of money there. And in some polling, it looks like Dolan has taken the lead. So it's one of the most watched Senate races. And if Dolan does pull it off, or maybe even Frank LaRose, who's running third place, but if Dolan pulls it off, it does show that sort of schism as well between that MAGA-based Republican and sort of that more traditional conservative Republicans, establishment Republican. So really, it does say a lot about the former president's sway in this race.
Fin, violence was an issue in the 2016 campaign, at Trump rallies, at other junctures. In 2020, obviously, there was January 6th, and so everyone's sort of on high alert for anything related to violence in the Trump campaign. And so this bloodbath comment over the weekend, he said, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. He was coming off of comments about the auto industry, and his campaign, I know, was saying it was all about electric cars. You could hear it both ways, to be honest. You could interpret it in one of two ways. What's the criticism? What's the fallout?
No, you're absolutely right there, Tony. I mean, you look at those comments, the bloodbath comments. The campaign says contextually he was referring to the auto industry. He did just say about if he were president, he'd be implementing 100% tariffs on those foreign imports, the country's cars that are coming in as well. However, there has been that criticism. The Biden campaign did jump on it right away, saying that Donald Trump wants more January 6th. But all he's going to get is another defeat. And you do hear it both ways. Some say yes, his campaign says yes, contextually it was about the auto industry, and others say it was a dog whistle to his base. And he is known for this inflammatory sort of language and rhetoric, right? And he even said so in a Fox interview on Sunday that he uses this to make a point and to get attention. Also, other really divisive and controversial comments from that day is that he talked about undocumented migrants, and he said some of them were not people, and he even referred to them as animals. Very, very controversial remarks that quickly got some pretty severe backlash and criticism from migrant advocates and other groups.
Yeah. Yeah. Typically, that kind of language opens the door to some terrible chapters in American history. It does echo that language. He says he means something else. So I guess people will take him at his word or not. Fin Gomez, we love your word. Appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Lilia.